The sun beat down mercilessly on Jefferson, Texas, as Pearl O'Malley stared at the ground through tears of humiliation, the iron shackles biting into her wrists and ankles while townsfolk passed by with judgmental glares and whispered accusations. The year was 1875, and being chained to a post in the town square for theft was not just punishment, it was a warning to others. A public spectacle that Pearl never imagined would become her reality. Pearl's auburn hair hung in limp strands around her face, partially shielding her from the stares but doing nothing to protect her fair skin from the unforgiving Texas sun. 3 days she had been there, with only minimal water and stale bread, all for taking a loaf of bread and some cheese from the general store. 3 days of watching people she had known her whole life pass by without meeting her eyes. 3 days of feeling her spirit crack like the parched earth beneath her boots. Another day ought to teach her, Sheriff Wallace announced loudly to no one in particular as he made his morning rounds. Thieving is thieving, no matter who does it or why. Pearl didn't bother to look up. She had given up explaining that her younger siblings were hungry, that their mother was bedridden with fever, that their father had abandoned them months ago. The sheriff had heard it all before and dismissed it with the same heartless logic. The law was the law. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered in Pearl's exhausted mind until they stopped directly in front of her. Dust swirled around polished boots that appeared in her limited field of vision. Pearl mustered what little strength she had left to raise her head, squinting against the sun to see the figure towering above her. Isaac Stone was not a man who went unnoticed in Jefferson. At 30 years old, he stood over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work and a quiet confidence that commanded respect without demanding it. His dark hair fell just past his collar, and his face, though weathered by years under the open sky, retained a youthfulness in his clear blue eyes. "What's the meaning of this, Sheriff?" Isaac's deep voice carried across the square, drawing attention from passers-by who slowed to watch the confrontation. "Law and order, Stone," Sheriff Wallace replied, approaching with his thumbs hooked in his belt. "This one's been caught stealing from Peterson's store, making an example of her." Isaac's jaw tightened as he looked down at Pearl's sunburned face and cracked lips. "How much is her fine?" $20, the sheriff replied with a smirk, "plus 5 for court costs." Without hesitation, Isaac reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. He counted out the money and held it toward the sheriff. $25. "Now get these chains off her." The sheriff's smug expression faltered. "Now hold on, Stone. You can't just—" "The law says her freedom can be bought for $25. Isaac interrupted, his voice steady but with an edge that made the sheriff take a step back. "I'm paying her fine, unless there's some other law I'm not aware of." A small crowd had gathered, watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Sheriff Wallace glanced around, aware of the many witnesses to this confrontation. With obvious reluctance, he took the money and produced a set of keys from his pocket. "Your charity's wasted on this one," he muttered as he unlocked the shackles around Pearl's wrists and ankles. "She'll just be back here soon enough." As the last chain fell away, Pearl swayed on her feet, her legs weak from days of limited movement. Isaac's strong hand caught her elbow, steadying her with a gentleness that contrasted with his imposing presence. "Thank you," Pearl whispered, her voice raspy from thirst and disuse. Isaac nodded once, then turned to address the sheriff again. "I believe her personal effects were taken as well." The sheriff frowned but jerked his head toward the jailhouse. "At the office, she can collect them herself." "We'll do that," Isaac said firmly. "And then I believe Miss O'Malley could use a proper meal and some medical attention." Pearl stared at him in confusion. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Isaac's expression softened slightly. "I know enough. I know that no one deserves to be treated like an animal for trying to feed their family." A murmur ran through the crowd, and Pearl noticed several people looking away in shame. They had all known her situation, yet none had stepped forward to help until this stranger not a complete stranger. She recognized him now from her peripheral awareness of town affairs. Isaac Stone owned one of the larger ranches outside Jefferson. He wasn't a frequent visitor to town, but when he came, people noticed. "I don't need your charity," Pearl said, summoning what dignity she could despite her weakened state. "It's not charity," Isaac replied quietly. "It's common decency. Now, let's get your things and find you something to eat." Pearl wanted to argue, to maintain the last shreds of her pride, but her body betrayed her as her knees buckled. Isaac caught her before she hit the ground, his strong arms lifting her with ease. "Put me down," she protested feebly. "People are watching." "Let them," Isaac said, carrying her toward his horse. "They've watched worse these past 3 days without lifting a finger to help." The walk to the sheriff's office was mercifully short. Isaac set Pearl down gently on a bench outside, ensuring she was steady before stepping inside to retrieve her few possessions. He emerged moments later with a small cloth bundle that contained all she had been carrying when arrested: a worn shawl, a hairbrush that had belonged to her grandmother, and a small book of poetry. "The Café Royale is just down the street," Isaac said, offering Pearl his arm for support. "Can you walk that far, or shall I carry you again?" Pearl straightened her spine, pulling together what remained of her strength. "I can walk." They made their way slowly down the main street, Pearl acutely aware of the stares that followed them. The Café Royale was one of the finer establishments in Jefferson, a place Pearl had never entered before. As Isaac held the door open for her, she hesitated. "I can't go in there like this," she whispered, gesturing to her dirty dress and disheveled appearance. "Madame Beaufort won't mind," Isaac assured her, guiding her inside with a gentle hand at the small of her back. The cafe owner, a plump Frenchwoman who had settled in Jefferson after the war, took one look at Pearl and clucked her tongue sympathetically. "Mon Dieu, what have they done to you, child? Come, sit." Pearl found herself ushered to a private table in the back corner, where Madame Beaufort personally brought a pitcher of cool water and a damp cloth. While Pearl gratefully cleaned her face and hands, Isaac ordered a substantial meal and spoke quietly with the proprietress. Pearl was too exhausted to question what they discussed, focusing instead on the blessed relief of water soothing her parched throat. The food arrived quickly: a hearty beef stew, fresh bread with butter, and a slice of apple pie. Pearl tried to maintain some semblance of decorum, but her hunger overwhelmed her manners. Isaac watched her eat without comment, occasionally refilling her water glass but otherwise giving her the dignity of satisfying her needs without unnecessary conversation. When Pearl finally sat back, having consumed more food in one sitting than she had in days, she looked at Isaac with clearer eyes. "I don't understand why you're doing this, Mr. Stone." "Isaac," he corrected gently. "And sometimes a man does what's right simply because it's right." Pearl studied him, searching for hidden motives or expectations in his steady gaze. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Well, I'm grateful regardless of your reasons, but I need to get home. My mother and siblings are being looked after." Isaac interrupted. "Madame Beaufort has sent her boy with food and medicine, and the doctor will be checking on your mother this afternoon. I've taken care of it." A complex mixture of relief and indignation washed over Pearl. "I can't repay you for all this." "I'm not asking you to," Isaac replied, "but I do have a proposition for you, if you're willing to hear it." Pearl tensed immediately, her defenses rising. Men didn't help women like her, young, poor, and vulnerable, without expecting something in return. "What kind of proposition?" "An honest job," Isaac said simply. "My housekeeper left last month to care for her ailing sister in Dallas. The house is in disarray, and I'm in need of someone who can cook, clean, and help manage the household affairs. The position comes with room and board for you and your family, if you wish to bring them. Pearl stared at him in disbelief. You're offering me a job? As your housekeeper? Yes. The ranch is large enough that your mother could recover in peace, and there's plenty of fresh air and good food for your siblings. The pay is $15 a month, which I know isn't a fortune, but it's more than generous. Pearl interrupted, her mind racing. It was more money than she'd ever earned, and the promise of shelter and food for her family was almost too good to be true. But why me? You don't know anything about me, my skills, or my character. Isaac's expression remained steady. I know you were willing to risk imprisonment to feed your family. That tells me enough about your character. As for skills, housekeeping can be learned. The ranch is 10 miles out of town, not so far that you couldn't visit Jefferson occasionally, but far enough that the gossip wouldn't follow you daily. Pearl hesitated, turning the offer over in her mind. It seemed too perfect a solution, yet she couldn't afford to refuse out of pride. Her siblings' 12-year-old twins Henry and Hannah, and 8-year-old Samuel needed stability and regular meals. Her mother needed proper care to recover from her illness. When would you need me to start? She asked finally. As soon as you're able, Isaac replied. Take a day or two to regain your strength and make arrangements for your family. I'll send a wagon for you when you're ready. Pearl nodded slowly. I accept your offer, Mr. Isaac. Thank you. Good, he said, standing and placing money on the table for their meal. Madame Beaufort has offered a room upstairs where you can rest today. I have some business to attend to in town, but I'll check on you before I leave for the ranch this evening. As he turned to go, Pearl called after him. Isaac, you still haven't told me why. Why me? Why now? Isaac paused, his back still to her. For a moment, Pearl thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, Because I know what it's like to watch your family suffer while the town looks away. Without another word, he walked out, leaving Pearl to wonder about the man who had, in the space of an hour, completely altered the course of her life. True to his word, Isaac returned to the cafe late that afternoon. Pearl had spent the day resting in the small but clean room Madame Beaufort had provided, her mind alternating between gratitude for her unexpected rescue and anxiety about the changes ahead. She had also received word that the doctor had indeed visited her family, providing medicine for her mother and assuring the children that Pearl would return soon. When Isaac knocked on her door, Pearl had washed her face and combed her hair, borrowing a clean dress that Madame Beaufort had found for her. It was a bit large, but infinitely better than the filthy garment she had worn in the town square. You look better, Isaac observed, his gaze taking in her improved appearance with approval but without inappropriate interest. I feel better, Pearl admitted. Thank you for sending the doctor to my family. Isaac nodded. I've made arrangements for the wagon to collect you and your family the day after tomorrow. That should give your mother time to strengthen a bit for the journey, and you time to pack your belongings. That's very considerate, Pearl said, studying him with renewed curiosity. I still don't understand why you're being so kind to me. Isaac's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, a memory, perhaps, or an old pain. Not every act of kindness needs explanation, Miss O'Malley. Pearl, she corrected. If I'm to call you Isaac, then you should call me Pearl. A slight smile touched his lips. Pearl, then. I should warn you that the ranch is not as refined as some places in town. It's functional rather than fancy, and I'm often out working with the cattle from dawn till dusk. I'm not afraid of hard work, Pearl assured him, and I'm certainly not accustomed to fancy surroundings. No, I don't suppose you are, Isaac said thoughtfully. Still, it's a change. You'll have your own quarters in the main house, a bedroom with a small sitting area attached. Your siblings can share the 2 rooms across the hall, And there's a downstairs bedroom for your mother that won't require her to manage stairs during her recovery. Pearl's eyes widened at this description. That sounds more generous than I expected. The house was built with a large family in mind, Isaac explained, a shadow crossing his face briefly. It deserves to have people in it again. Before Pearl could inquire about this cryptic statement, Isaac handed her a small purse. An advance on your first month's wages. You'll need supplies for your family's journey, and perhaps some personal items. Pearl hesitated before accepting the money. I'll repay every penny through honest work, she promised. I know you will. Isaac tipped his hat. I need to return to the ranch tonight, but my foreman, Joe Blackwood, will bring the wagon. He's a good man, been with me since I started the ranch 8 years ago. With that, Isaac bid her good night and left Pearl to contemplate the rapid changes in her circumstances. From the depths of public humiliation to the promise of a new start in the span of a single day, it seemed almost unreal. The next day, Pearl returned home to find her mother improved but still weak, and her siblings both overjoyed at her return and traumatized by her public punishment. Young Samuel clung to her skirts, while the twins peppered her with questions about where she had been and why Mr. Stone was helping them. He's offered me a job as his housekeeper, Pearl explained, carefully measuring herbs for a strengthening tea for her mother. We'll all be going to live at his ranch, where there's plenty of food and clean air. Is he a nice man? Hannah asked, her young face serious. Sheriff Wallace said awful things about you when he came to tell us you were arrested. Pearl's heart clenched at the thought of what her siblings must have endured in her absence. Mr. Stone seems to be a very kind man, she assured them. He paid my fine and has offered us a new start. That's more than anyone else in this town was willing to do. Will we have our own rooms? Henry asked, his practical nature asserting itself. You and Samuel will share, and Hannah will have her own, Pearl confirmed. And Mother will have a comfortable room downstairs until she's well enough to manage stairs. Elizabeth O'Malley, pale and thin on her sickbed, reached for Pearl's hand. Are you certain about this, daughter? Moving us all to a stranger's ranch. People will talk. Let them, Pearl said with more confidence than she felt. They've already shown what their good opinion is worth. Mr. Stone has been nothing but respectful, and this is our chance to start fresh. The family spent the rest of the day and the next morning packing their few possessions and saying goodbye to the small rental house that had been their home since their father left. Pearl was surprised by how little she felt at leaving the town that had once been her whole world, now seemed small and mean-spirited after her public shaming. True to Isaac's word, Joe Blackwood arrived with a wagon mid-morning. He was an older man with graying hair and a weathered face, but his eyes were kind as he helped load their meager belongings and carefully assisted Elizabeth into the wagon bed, which had been prepared with blankets and pillows for her comfort. Mr. Stone's been working since dawn getting everything ready for you folks, Joe mentioned as they set out. Never seen him fuss so much over the house before. Pearl, sitting beside him on the driver's bench with Samuel on her lap and the twins settled in the wagon bed with their mother, glanced at the foreman curiously. Has Mr. Stone lived alone all this time? Joe's expression grew guarded. Not my place to tell his story, Miss O'Malley, but I will say he's a good man who's seen his share of hardship. Treats his workers fair and doesn't put on airs despite having built up one of the most successful operations in the county. The journey took most of the day, following the road out of Jefferson and then turning onto increasingly smaller trails until they crested a hill and the Stone Ranch came into view. Pearl caught her breath at the sight. The main house was larger than she had imagined, a 2-story structure of sturdy timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front and one side. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing on rolling pastures. Welcome to Stoneheart Ranch, Joe announced, guiding the horses down the slope toward the house. As they approached, Pearl saw Isaac emerge from the barn. He strode toward the wagon, dust from the day's work coating his clothes, but his face lighting with a smile that transformed his usually serious countenance. "You made good time," he called to Joe, then turned his attention to Pearl and her family. "Welcome to Stoneheart. I hope the journey wasn't too taxing." "It was fine," Pearl assured him, accepting his help to climb down from the wagon. "Your foreman took good care of us." Isaac nodded approvingly at Joe, then moved to the back of the wagon where Elizabeth lay. "Mrs. O'Malley, I'm Isaac Stone. If you'll permit me, I'll carry you inside to your room. It's all prepared for you." Elizabeth, too weak to protest, merely nodded. Isaac lifted her with the same gentle strength he had shown Pearl in town, carrying her toward the house as though she weighed nothing at all. Pearl and the children followed, with Joe bringing up the rear with their belongings. The interior of the house was clean but sparsely decorated, with solid, functional furniture and few ornamental touches. Isaac led them to a pleasant ground floor bedroom where a fire already burned in the small fireplace, taking the chill off the spring evening air. He settled Elizabeth on the bed, which had been made up with fresh linens and extra pillows. "Pearl will be just upstairs if you need anything during the night," he explained to Elizabeth. "And my room is at the end of this hallway if there's an emergency." Pearl shot him a grateful look for his thoughtfulness. Once Elizabeth was settled, Isaac showed them the rest of the house: the large kitchen with its massive wood-burning stove, the dining room with a table that could seat 12, the sitting room with its comfortable chairs and bookshelves, and upstairs, the bedrooms that would be theirs. Pearl's room was larger than any she had ever occupied, with a real bed instead of a pallet and a small attached sitting area with a desk and chair. The twins and Samuel were equally delighted with their rooms, exclaiming over luxuries as simple as having their own pillows and blankets. "I hope everything is satisfactory," Isaac said as they completed the tour, standing somewhat awkwardly in the upstairs hallway. "Mrs. Blackwood, Joe's wife, lives in the small cottage behind the house and has been helping with meals. She's prepared dinner for tonight, so you needn't worry about cooking until tomorrow." "Everything is more than satisfactory," Pearl assured him. "It's overwhelming, actually. Your generosity is extraordinary." Isaac looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's a business arrangement, nothing more. You'll work hard for your keep, I have no doubt." He cleared his throat. "Dinner will be ready in an hour. Take some time to settle in, and I'll see you all at the table." As he headed back downstairs, Pearl turned to find Hannah watching her with thoughtful eyes. "He looks sad," the 12-year-old observed. "What do you mean?" Pearl asked, surprised by her sister's perception. Hannah shrugged. "When he smiles, it doesn't reach his eyes all the way, like Father used to be, before he left." Pearl considered this observation as she helped her siblings unpack their few belongings. It was true that despite his kindness, there was a reserve about Isaac Stone, a sense that he kept part of himself carefully guarded. But that was hardly surprising. Most people had their sorrows and secrets. Pearl certainly had her own. Dinner that evening was a simple but delicious beef stew, served by Mrs. Blackwood, a cheerful woman in her 50s who clucked over how thin the children were and promised to fatten them up proper in no time. Isaac ate quietly, answering the twins' eager questions about the ranch and life in the West with patient thoroughness, but offering little personal information. After the meal, while Pearl was helping Mrs. Blackwood clear the table, the older woman pulled her aside. "Mr. Stone is a private man," she said in a low voice, "but don't mistake his reserve for coldness. He's got a heart bigger than Texas, just doesn't show it easy like." "I can see that," Pearl replied, glancing toward the sitting room where Isaac was now showing Samuel a small wooden horse he had apparently carved himself. "I still don't understand why he's done all this for us." Mrs. Blackwood's expression softened. "Maybe someday he'll tell you himself. Just know that this house has been too empty for too long, Having you and your family here might be as much a blessing for him as it is for you. Over the next few weeks, Pearl settled into her role as housekeeper of Stoneheart Ranch. The work was demanding but satisfying, keeping the large house clean, planning and preparing meals, tending to the kitchen garden, and managing the household accounts that Isaac entrusted to her. Her mother grew stronger under the care of the doctor who visited weekly, and her siblings thrived in the open spaces of the ranch, with Samuel following Joe Blackwood like a shadow and the twins finding their own interests, Henry in the horses and Hannah in the vegetable garden. Isaac remained something of an enigma. He was unfailingly polite, even kind in his quiet way, but maintained a certain distance. He worked from dawn until dusk with his ranch hands, taking his meals with Pearl's family but often retiring to his study afterwards to manage the ranch's business affairs. Occasionally, Pearl would find him on the porch late in the evening, staring at the stars with an expression that made her heart ache for reasons she couldn't name. They settled into a comfortable routine, with Isaac gradually relaxing his formal manner as the weeks passed. He began to join them for longer at dinner, even reading aloud from books in the sitting room some evenings while Pearl sewed or mended. The children adored him, especially Samuel, who had never really known a father figure. One evening in late June, nearly 2 months after their arrival at Stoneheart, Pearl found Isaac alone on the porch after the rest of the household had gone to bed. The night was warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers from the nearby fields. Pearl had wrapped a light shawl around her shoulders and stepped out for some air, not expecting to find him still awake. "I'm sorry," she said, stopping short. "I didn't mean to intrude." Isaac glanced up, surprise momentarily replacing the distant look in his eyes. "You're not intruding. It's your home too now." The simple statement caught Pearl off guard. In 2 months, she had indeed come to think of Stoneheart as home, but she hadn't expected Isaac to acknowledge it so directly. "May I join you?" she asked hesitantly. He nodded, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. For a few minutes, they sat in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds, the chirping of crickets, the occasional lowing of cattle in the distant pastures, the soft hooting of an owl. "Your brother is a natural with horses," Isaac said eventually. "Joe says Henry has a gift for calming even the most skittish colts." Pearl smiled with pride. "He's always had a way with animals. Before our father left, Henry used to help him with the neighbor's farm horses." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "He could have a future in it if he wanted. I'd be willing to train him properly when he's a bit older." "That's very generous of you," Pearl said, touched by his consideration for her brother's future. "Henry would be thrilled." Another comfortable silence fell between them, until Pearl gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since that first day in Jefferson. "Isaac, why did you help us that day? The truth, please." Isaac's hands tightened slightly on the arms of his chair, but his voice remained steady. "I told you no one deserves to be treated that way." "There's more to it than that," Pearl pressed gently. "Mrs. Blackwood hinted as much, and I've seen it in your eyes when you think no one is looking. Something in my situation spoke to you personally." For a long moment, Pearl thought he wouldn't answer. Then, with a deep sigh, Isaac leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees and staring out into the darkness. 8 years ago, he began slowly, my wife and daughter were chained in that same town square, accused of stealing medicine from the apothecary. I was away on a cattle drive. By the time word reached me and I returned to Jefferson, Catherine, my wife, had contracted pneumonia from exposure. She died 3 days after I brought them home. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Pearl's hand flew to her mouth, her heart constricting at the pain evident in every line of his body. "Oh, Isaac, I'm so sorry. Lily, our daughter, recovered physically, but she was never the same. She was only 6 when it happened. She stopped speaking, stopped smiling. 2 winters later, she followed her mother, though the doctor called it influenza rather than a broken heart. "That's why you built this big house," Pearl whispered, understanding dawning. "For the family you lost." Isaac nodded, still not looking at her. "I had just bought the land. Catherine and I had such plans, a house full of children, generations of Stones building something that would last. Instead, I buried them both on that hill over there." He nodded toward a small rise visible in the moonlight, where 2 stones stood as silent sentinels. "When I saw you in those chains," he continued, "all I could see was Catherine. The same desperate look in your eyes, the same unjust punishment for trying to care for your family. I couldn't save her, but I could save you." Pearl felt tears welling in her eyes. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his. "Thank you for telling me, and thank you for saving me us." Isaac finally turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight and something else of vulnerability he had never shown before. "Having your family here, hearing children's laughter in the house again. It's been healing something I thought would stay broken forever." Pearl squeezed his hand gently. "Then I'm glad we could bring that to you, even unknowingly." They sat like that for a while longer, hands joined, sharing the quiet night and a new understanding. When Pearl finally rose to go inside, she felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them, a barrier lowered, a truth acknowledged. The following weeks brought subtle changes to life at Stoneheart Ranch. Isaac began joining them more frequently, not just at meals but throughout the day when his work allowed. He taught Samuel how to whittle, showed Henry more about handling horses, and even helped Hannah expand the kitchen garden, bringing seeds from town for vegetables and flowers alike. With Pearl, his manner gradually softened from formal employer to something warmer, more familiar. He sought her opinion on ranch matters, lingered over after dinner coffee to discuss books they had both read, and occasionally joined her for evening walks around the property. One afternoon in late July, Pearl was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she spotted riders approaching from the direction of Jefferson. As they drew nearer, she recognized Sheriff Wallace and 2 other men she vaguely recalled from town. Her heart quickened with apprehension as she hurried inside to find Isaac. He was in his study, reviewing the ranch accounts, but stood immediately when she explained who was coming. "Stay inside with your family," he instructed, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel. "I'll handle this." Pearl watched from the window as Isaac strode out to meet the riders, who had stopped in the yard. Though she couldn't hear what was said, the sheriff's aggressive posture and Isaac's rigid stance told her enough. When Wallace pointed toward the house, clearly demanding something, Isaac stepped deliberately into his path, one hand resting casually near the revolver at his hip. The confrontation lasted only minutes before the sheriff and his companions turned their horses and rode away, but Isaac remained standing in the yard long after they had disappeared from view, his back straight and unmoving. When he finally came inside, his face was set in hard lines that softened only slightly when he saw Pearl waiting anxiously in the front hall. "What did they want?" she asked, already suspecting the answer. "Sheriff Wallace claims there's been another theft at Peterson's store," Isaac replied, his voice controlled. "Seems he thought you might be responsible, despite the fact that you haven't been to town in months." "He came all this way just to accuse me?" Pearl asked incredulously. Isaac's jaw tightened. "He came to remind me that your fine only covered your previous offense, not to give sanctuary to a known criminal." He mimicked Wallace's self-important tone with barely disguised contempt. "And what did you tell him?" "I reminded him that he has no jurisdiction on my property, that you have been here continuously since May, and that if he ever shows his face at Stoneheart again without a proper warrant, he'll regret it." Isaac's eyes flashed dangerously. I also mentioned that my lawyer in Dallas would be very interested to hear about his harassment of an employee under my protection. Pearl felt a complicated mixture of gratitude, relief, and something deeper stir within her. Thank you for defending me. Isaac's expression softened as he looked at her. You're part of Stoneheart now, Pearl. I protect what's mine. The possessive phrase sent an unexpected warmth through her. Over the past months, she had tried to ignore her growing feelings for Isaac the way her heart quickened when he entered a room, how she treasured their conversations, the sense of rightness she felt in his presence. He was her employer, her benefactor, and despite their deepening friendship, she had no reason to believe he saw her as anything more than the woman he had rescued from public shame. But sometimes, in unguarded moments like this, she caught glimpses of something in his eyes that made her wonder if perhaps her feelings weren't as one-sided as she assumed. As July melted into August, life on the ranch continued its pleasant rhythm, disturbed only by occasional supply trips to Jefferson, which Isaac now insisted on making himself rather than sending Pearl or Joe. The heat of the Texas summer made work more challenging, but the house's thick walls kept it relatively cool, and evenings on the porch became a cherished ritual for the entire household. One particularly hot afternoon, Isaac suggested a picnic by the creek that ran through the eastern edge of his property. The water's cool there, under the shade of the cottonwoods, he explained at breakfast. It would be a welcome relief from this heat, especially for the children. Elizabeth, now fully recovered and helping with household duties, exchanged a knowing glance with Pearl. That sounds lovely, she said. I'll help prepare the food while Pearl finishes the mending. The entire household made the excursion, traveling in the wagon with blankets, food, and even fishing poles for the children. The spot Isaac had chosen was indeed beautiful, a wide, shallow creek with clear water flowing over smooth stones, shaded by towering cottonwood trees that rustled gently in the breeze. While Elizabeth supervised the children splashing in the shallows, Pearl and Isaac spread blankets and unpacked the food: fried chicken, cornbread, pickled vegetables, and apple pie that Pearl had baked that morning. This was a wonderful idea, Pearl said, watching Samuel laugh as he attempted to catch minnows with his bare hands. I haven't seen them this happy in a long time. Children need moments like this, Isaac replied, his own gaze following her brother's antics. Simple joys to balance life's hardships. Pearl studied his profile, noting the relaxed set of his shoulders and the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You're good with them, she observed. You would have been a wonderful father. Isaac turned to meet her gaze, his eyes holding hers with unexpected intensity. I still hope to be someday, when the time is right. The simple statement hung between them, charged with meaning that Pearl hardly dared interpret. Before she could respond, Hannah called out that she was hungry, breaking the moment. The afternoon passed in pleasant companionship, with fishing attempts mostly unsuccessful, stone skipping contests won handily by Henry, and eventually, after the meal had been eaten and cleared away, stories told by Isaac about his early days in Texas. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the creek, the children's energy finally waned, and they piled back into the wagon for the return journey. Pearl, however, lingered by the creek's edge, reluctant to end such a perfect day. Isaac noticed her hesitation and approached, standing beside her as they watched the water flow past. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked softly. Pearl smiled, still gazing at the creek. "I was just thinking how much has changed in such a short time. 3 months ago, I was chained in the town square, certain that my life and my family's was ruined forever. Now here we are, safe and happy, with prospects I never dared dream of. You've brought changes to Stoneheart as well," Isaac said. "Good changes." Pearl turned to face him then, emboldened by the warmth in his voice. "Have I?" "You know you have," he replied, his eyes searching hers. This place was just a shell before you came a house. Not a home. You've brought it back to life. You've brought me back to life. Pearl's heart thundered in her chest at his words. Isaac, whatever she might have said, was lost as he stepped closer, one hand gently cupping her cheek. I never expected to feel this way again, he murmured. I never thought I could. Feel what? Pearl whispered, hardly daring to breathe. Instead of answering with words, Isaac lowered his head and kissed her, his lips gentle but insistent against hers. Pearl responded instinctively, her hands rising to rest against his chest, as she returned the kiss with all the feelings she had kept guarded for weeks. When they finally parted, Isaac rested his forehead against hers, his breathing slightly uneven. I'm falling in love with you, Pearl O'Malley, he confessed quietly. I've been fighting it, telling myself it's too soon, that you might feel obligated because of everything that's happened. But I can't fight it anymore. Pearl's eyes filled with tears of joy. I'm not kissing you out of obligation, she assured him, her voice thick with emotion. I'm kissing you because somewhere between you unlocking those chains and today, I fell in love with you too. Isaac pulled back slightly to search her face, as if confirming the truth of her words. What he saw must have satisfied him, because he smiled a full, genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire countenance. I don't want to rush this, he said, taking her hands in his. You deserve a proper courtship, not just gratitude confused with deeper feelings. And your family needs time to adjust to the idea as well. Pearl nodded, appreciating his consideration even as her heart soared with happiness. We have all the time we need, she assured him. We're not going anywhere. As they walked back to the wagon hand in hand, Pearl felt as though she was floating rather than walking. Her family noticed the change immediately, the twins exchanging knowing smiles, Elizabeth nodding approvingly, and Samuel looking confused but pleased by the general air of happiness. The following weeks brought a shift in Isaac and Pearl's relationship that was subtle to outsiders but profound for them. He began to court her properly, bringing wildflowers from the fields, taking her on rides to show her the furthest reaches of his property, and each evening, stealing a private moment on the porch for conversations that deepened their understanding of one another. Pearl learned about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his journey west as a young man seeking opportunity, his meeting and falling in love with Catherine, and the dreams they had shared before tragedy struck. In turn, she told him about her own past, her father's gradual descent into drinking and gambling that had eventually led him to abandon his family, her struggles to keep them fed and housed, and her fears for the future before Isaac had entered their lives. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Isaac took her hand. I've been thinking, he began, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. The cattle drive to Kansas City is coming up in 2 weeks. I usually go myself to oversee the sale, but I'm considering sending Joe this year. Pearl looked at him curiously. Why the change? Because I don't want to leave you, he said simply. Not for the month it would take to complete the drive and return. But I've also been thinking that if I did go, I could stop in Dallas on the return journey. What's in Dallas? Pearl asked, though something in his expression made her heart beat faster. Isaac smiled, raising her hand to his lips. A very fine jeweler who could help me select a ring worthy of the woman I love. His expression grew serious. Would that be something you might welcome, Pearl? A proposal when the time is right. Pearl's breath caught in her throat. Are you asking if I would marry you? I'm asking if I may ask properly when I return, Isaac clarified, his eyes never leaving hers. With a ring and the blessing of your mother and siblings. I love you, Pearl. I want to build a life with you, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. Tears of happiness blurred Pearl's vision as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, you may ask, and yes, my answer will be yes. The joy that spread across Isaac's face was like the sunrise breaking over the horizon, powerful, transformative, illuminating. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that left her breathless, his hands cradling her face as though she was the most precious thing he had ever held. I'll go to Kansas City, he decided, pressing his forehead to hers. And I'll return with a ring and a future for us both. The preparations for the cattle drive consumed the next 2 weeks, with Isaac and his men working from dawn until dusk to gather the herd and make ready for the long journey. Pearl threw herself into ensuring that he and his cowboys would have plenty of provisions, mending clothes, baking bread that would keep for the first part of the journey, and preparing jerky and other preserved foods. The night before his departure, after the rest of the household had retired, Isaac and Pearl stood in the shadowed corner of the porch, wrapped in each other's arms. A month seems an eternity, Pearl murmured against his chest. I'll miss you every day. Isaac's arms tightened around her. I'll be back before the first frost, he promised. And when I return, we'll begin our life together properly. He tilted her face up to his. Until then, know that I carry you with me, in my heart, wherever I go. Their parting kiss was bittersweet, tender yet intense, filled with both the promise of reunion and the pain of separation. As Pearl watched him ride away the next morning, leading his men and the massive herd of cattle toward the horizon, she felt a curious mixture of longing and contentment. The longing was for his swift and safe return. The contentment came from the certainty that he would indeed come back to her, that their future together was as sure as the sun rising each morning. The weeks of Isaac's absence passed slowly for Pearl, despite the constant activity of running the household. She found herself watching the road each evening, though she knew it was far too early for his return. The children seemed to sense her distraction, with Samuel often climbing into her lap to assure her that Mr. Stone promised he'd come back, and he always keeps his promises. 25 days after Isaac's departure, just as Pearl was beginning to calculate when he might realistically return, disaster struck. A severe storm swept through the region, bringing torrential rain that caused the creek, their peaceful picnic spot, to overflow its banks and flood part of the eastern pasture. Joe Blackwood and the remaining ranch hands worked desperately to move cattle to higher ground, but 2 men were not enough for the task. I need to go help them, Pearl decided, watching from the porch as lightning illuminated the rain-soaked landscape. You can't go out in this, Elizabeth protested. It's too dangerous. If we lose half the herd, it would devastate Isaac, Pearl replied, already pulling on a heavy coat. Henry can help too, he's good with the horses. Despite her mother's objections, Pearl and Henry rode out into the storm, following Joe's instructions to help drive the panicked cattle away from the rapidly rising water. The work was grueling and dangerous, with the driving rain reducing visibility to mere feet and the frightened animals resistant to guidance. Hours later, as dawn broke and the storm finally began to subside, they had managed to save most of the herd. Pearl, soaked to the skin and exhausted beyond measure, was helping Henry unsaddle his horse when she heard a commotion from the main road. A rider was approaching at a gallop, pushing his mount to its limits despite the muddy conditions. As he drew closer, Pearl's heart leapt to her throat. It was Isaac, alone and 2 weeks earlier than expected. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his eyes wild as they searched the yard and found her. In 3 long strides he reached her, pulling her into an embrace so tight it nearly crushed the breath from her lungs. Thank God, he murmured into her wet hair. When I saw the flooding along the road, when Joe told me you were out there. His voice broke, unable to complete the thought. I'm fine, Pearl assured him, pulling back to see his face. We all are. We saved most of the cattle too. Isaac shook his head, his hands framing her face. I don't care about the cattle. I care about you. He kissed her then, heedless of their audience. A desperate kiss that spoke of fear and relief and love so powerful it transcended caution. When they finally separated, Pearl noticed the rest of the household had gathered on the porch, watching with varying degrees of amusement and approval. Even Joe Blackwood was grinning broadly, despite his exhaustion. I thought you weren't due back for another 2 weeks, Pearl said, suddenly conscious of her bedraggled appearance. We got a better price than expected in Kansas City. Sold the entire herd in 3 days, Isaac explained. I decided to ride ahead of the men. His expression softened. I couldn't wait any longer to see you, to give you this. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Mindful of their audience but too impatient to wait for a more private moment, Isaac dropped to one knee in the muddy yard. Pearl O'Malley, he said, his voice clear and carrying in the post-storm stillness. I love you with all that I am and all that I have. You brought light back into my life when I thought darkness was all that remained for me. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? He opened the box to reveal a ring that made Pearl gasp, a perfect diamond surrounded by smaller sapphires that matched the color of Isaac's eyes, set in white gold that gleamed even in the gray morning light. Yes, Pearl whispered, then louder. Yes, Isaac Stone, I will marry you. As he slid the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her again, cheers erupted from the porch. Samuel raced down to hug them both, followed quickly by the twins and Elizabeth, creating a joyful huddle in the middle of the muddy yard. When? Henry asked practically, once the initial excitement had calmed somewhat. When will you get married? Isaac looked to Pearl, leaving the decision to her. As soon as possible, she replied, her eyes never leaving his. Before the first snow. They were married on the first day of November, in a ceremony that combined simplicity with celebration. The ranch house was decorated with late autumn flowers and evergreen boughs, and guests included not only the ranch hands and their families but also several of Isaac's business associates from Jefferson and neighboring towns. Pearl wore a gown of cream-colored silk that Isaac had ordered from Dallas, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once belonged to her grandmother. Elizabeth had wept when she saw her daughter dressed as a bride, whispering that Pearl's father would have been proud to see this day, despite his failings. The ceremony itself was performed by the circuit preacher who visited the area monthly, a kind-faced older man who spoke of love's redemptive power and the blessing of second chances. As Pearl and Isaac exchanged their vows, standing before the fireplace in the home they now truly shared, Pearl felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. I, Isaac James Stone, take you, Pearl and O'Malley, to be my lawfully wedded wife, Isaac said, his voice steady and sure. I promise to love you, honor you and cherish you, in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad, for all the days of my life. When Pearl repeated the vows, her voice trembled slightly with emotion, but her eyes remained locked with Isaac's, drawing strength from the love she saw reflected there. With this ring, I thee wed, she concluded, sliding a plain gold band onto his finger to match the one he had placed on hers, her engagement ring now accompanied by a matching wedding band. By the power vested in me, the preacher announced, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Stone, you may kiss your bride. Isaac's kiss was gentle yet possessive, a perfect balance that promised both tenderness and passion. When they turned to face their assembled guests, Pearl saw nothing but approval and joy on the faces of those who had witnessed their union. The celebration continued well into the night, with music provided by 2 of the ranch hands who played fiddle and guitar, and dancing in the cleared space of the dining room. Pearl danced with her new husband, with her brothers, and even with Joe Blackwood, who declared gruffly that she had saved Stoneheart twice over, once by coming, and once by marrying the boss. As midnight approached, the guests gradually departed, returning to their homes or to the bunkhouse in the case of the ranch hands. Elizabeth shooed the children upstairs, giving Pearl a warm embrace before following them. "Be happy, my daughter," she whispered. "You deserve every joy." Finally alone, Pearl and Isaac stood in the center of the sitting room, husband and wife at last in every sense. Isaac reached for her hand, raising it to his lips. "Mrs. Stone," he said softly, the name a caress on his tongue. "Shall we retire?" The bedchamber they now shared, Isaac's room, with its large four-poster bed and adjoining private bath, had been prepared with fresh linens and a fire burning low in the grate. Candles cast a golden glow over everything, creating an atmosphere of warmth and intimacy. With gentle hands, Isaac helped Pearl remove the pins from her hair, watching in appreciation as the auburn waves tumbled down her back. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, running his fingers through the silky strands. "I still can't believe you're mine." "I am yours," Pearl confirmed, reaching up to loosen his tie. "As you are mine." Their first night together as husband and wife was everything Pearl had dreamed it might be: tender, passionate, a perfect expression of the love that had grown between them over the months since that fateful day in Jefferson. In Isaac's arms, she found not only pleasure but also a profound sense of belonging, of coming home in the truest sense. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, Isaac traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I have something to show you tomorrow," he said, his voice drowsy with contentment. "A surprise I've been working on." "What kind of surprise?" Pearl asked, lifting her head from his chest to see his face. Isaac smiled mysteriously. "You'll have to wait and see, but I hope you'll like it." The next morning, after breakfast with the family, Isaac led Pearl out to the stables where 2 horses were already saddled. "It's not far," he assured her as they mounted. "Just over the eastern ridge." They rode at a leisurely pace through the November sunshine, the air crisp but not yet truly cold. As they crested the ridge, Pearl gasped at what lay before her: a small house, newly built from the look of the fresh timber, with a neat fence surrounding it and a small barn to one side. "Isaac, what is this?" she asked as they approached. "A wedding gift," he replied, helping her dismount before the front door. "For your mother and siblings. I thought they might appreciate a place of their own, close enough to visit daily but with the privacy a growing family needs." Pearl stared at him in amazement. "You built them a house? When did you have time?" "I started it before I left for Kansas City," Isaac explained, producing a key from his pocket and opening the door. "Joe and the men continued the work while I was gone, and I finished it after I returned. It's modest, but solid: 4 bedrooms, a good kitchen, a sitting room." Inside, Pearl found the house completely furnished with new pieces from Jefferson and Dallas, the kitchen fully equipped, and even curtains at the windows. "It's perfect," she breathed, turning to embrace her husband. "They'll love it. But are you sure you want them to move out of Stoneheart? We have plenty of room." Isaac's expression was tender as he looked down at her. "They're your family, and now they're my family too. They'll always be welcome at Stoneheart, every day if they wish. But this way, Elizabeth can have her own household to manage, the twins can have more independence as they grow, and Samuel can divide his time between both homes as he chooses." He hesitated, a hint of uncertainty crossing his face for the first time. "And I thought, perhaps, we might want to fill Stoneheart with children of our own, someday. When you're ready." Pearl's heart swelled with love for this man who continued to surprise her with his thoughtfulness and generosity. "I am ready," she assured him, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "I want nothing more than to build a family with you, Isaac." The following spring, as wildflowers carpeted the Texas countryside and new calves dotted the pastures of Stoneheart Ranch, Pearl's suspicions were confirmed by the town doctor. She was expecting their first child, due in late autumn. Isaac's joy at the news was boundless. He lifted Pearl off her feet and spun her in a circle before setting her down carefully, suddenly concerned about jostling her. "A baby?" he marveled, placing his hand reverently over her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "The first of many, I hope," Pearl said, covering his hand with her own. "Enough to fill this big house with laughter again." As her pregnancy progressed, Isaac became ever more protective and attentive, insisting that Pearl rest frequently and hiring additional help for the household chores. Elizabeth, now happily established in her own home with the children, visited daily to offer advice and assistance, while Hannah took a special interest in preparing the nursery, sewing tiny garments and helping choose furniture. On a crisp October evening, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the following day, Pearl gave birth to a healthy son with a shock of dark hair like his father's and eyes that promised to be as blue as the Texas sky. "James?" Pearl whispered, cradling the infant as Isaac sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders and wonder in his eyes. "James Isaac Stone." "It's perfect," Isaac agreed, gently touching his son's tiny fingers. "He's perfect. You're perfect. I never thought I could be this happy again." "This is just the beginning," Pearl promised, leaning against his strength. "We have our whole lives ahead of us." As twilight settled over Stoneheart Ranch, Pearl looked from her newborn son to her husband, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in the span of 18 months. From the depths of despair and humiliation in the town square to this moment of perfect joy, it seemed almost unbelievable. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked softly, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was thinking about chains," Pearl replied, smiling at his puzzled look. "The ones you unlocked that day in Jefferson, yes, but also the invisible ones, chains of grief and loneliness that bound you, chains of fear and uncertainty that bound me. How freeing each other from those chains led us here, to this moment, to our son." Isaac's eyes glistened with emotion as he pressed a kiss to her forehead. "From chains to choices," he murmured. "From punishment to promise. From strangers to family," Pearl added, as little James made a soft sound in his sleep. "Our family." Outside, the first star of evening appeared in the darkening sky, a silent witness to the love that filled the house that had once stood empty of all but memories. Now, with the arrival of James Isaac Stone, Stoneheart Ranch had truly become what Isaac and Pearl had dreamed it might be, not just a home, but the beating heart of a family that would continue for generations to come. 5 years later, Pearl stood on the porch of Stoneheart Ranch, watching as Isaac taught their son James to ride his first pony, a gentle creature specially chosen for the purpose. Beside her, 3-year-old Catherine clutched her doll and cheered for her big brother, while the newest addition to the family, 6-month-old Thomas, slept peacefully in his mother's arms. Elizabeth, now in her 50s but still vital and active, sat in a rocking chair nearby, her knitting needles moving steadily as she worked on a sweater for Samuel, who at 13 had shot up in height and seemed to outgrow his clothes monthly. The twins, now 17, had found their own paths, Henry working with Isaac and the horses, developing a reputation throughout the county for his skill with even the most difficult animals, while Hannah had discovered a talent for teaching and was assisting at the small school that had been established for the children of neighboring ranches. As Pearl watched her family, both the one she had been born into and the one she had created with Isaac, she felt a sense of contentment that still sometimes seemed miraculous. Jefferson was a distant memory now, though they occasionally traveled there for supplies or church services. Sheriff Wallace had long since been replaced by a younger, fairer man who treated the Stone family with respect, either unaware or unconcerned with Pearl's past. "Mama, look!" James called excitedly as he guided his pony in a small circle, Isaac walking alongside with a lead rein. "I'm riding all by myself." "I see you, darling." Pearl called back, smiling at the pride in her son's face, a face that bore such a striking resemblance to his father's that it sometimes made her heart ache with love for them both. Isaac glanced up, catching her eye across the yard. Even after 6 years of marriage, that look still had the power to make her breath catch the mixture of love, desire, and gratitude that passed between them in a single glance, a silent acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them together and the life they had built. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into nighttime silence, Pearl and Isaac stood together on the porch, his arm around her waist as they gazed up at the star-filled Texas sky. "Happy?" Isaac asked softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," Pearl replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I was thinking earlier about how differently things might have turned out." "Oh," Isaac prompted, curious. Pearl nodded thoughtfully. "If you hadn't come to town that day, if you hadn't seen me in the square, if you hadn't been the kind of man who would stop to help a stranger in need, everything we have now might never have existed." Isaac was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "I believe we would have found each other somehow," he said finally. "Perhaps not in the same way, but some souls are meant to connect. Ours are two such souls, I think." "A romantic notion from my practical husband," Pearl teased gently. "Next you'll be writing poetry." Isaac laughed, turning her in his arms to face him. "I leave the poetry to you. I'm content with simpler truths. I love you. You love me. We have 3 beautiful children and a life that brings us joy every day. What more could poetry add to that?" "Nothing," Pearl conceded, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Not a single thing." As they stood together under the vast Texas sky, their lips meeting in a kiss that held the familiarity of years together, yet still sparked with the passion of new love, Pearl knew with absolute certainty that Isaac was right. Some souls were indeed meant to find each other, even across chains and town squares, across grief and uncertainty, across all the obstacles that life might place in their path. And having found each other, such souls could create something beautiful and lasting, a love that would endure long after the chains had rusted away, a love that would be told in family stories for generations to come, a love that had begun with an act of kindness in a town square and grown into the legacy of Stoneheart Ranch, where 2 broken hearts had mended each other and become whole again.